front couple of tables if you're looking for a seat. We'll begin our presentation now. I want to take a moment now to introduce Dr. Peter Kreeft. Peter Kreeft is a professor of philosophy at Boston College and also at the King's College in New York City. He's a regular contributor to several Christian publications, is in wide demand as a speaker at conferences, and is the author of over 75 books, including Back to Virtue, The God Who Loves You, Heaven, The Heart's Deepest Longing, Everything You Want to Know About Heaven, Your Questions, God's Answers, How to Win the Culture War, The Journey, Before I Go, Letters to Our Children About What Really Matters, and Jesus Shock. Dr. Kreeft is a convert to the Catholic Church from Reformed Protestantism. He earned an AD degree from Calvin College, an MA and a PhD from Fordham University, followed by postdoctoral work at Yale University. He's received several honors for achievements in the field of philosophy, including the Woodrow Wilson Award, Yale Sterling Fellowship, Newman Alumni Scholarship, Danforth Asian Religions Fellowship, and a Wethersfield Homeland Foundation Fellowship. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Peter Kreeft.
I am intimidated. First of all, nobody can live up to an introduction if it's any good at all. Best introduction is simply, here's Johnny. You asked an absent-minded philosophy professor to teach you how to teach young people how to pray. Well, that's like asking Donald Trump to talk about being polite. Or asking Pinocchio for a lecture on lying. I'm not a psychologist. I will not say anything that's specifically directed to young people or teenagers. And all I can tell you about prayer is basic stuff that I have learned from those who are much more advanced than myself. Fortunately, there are many people like that. And we who are down in the valley have the advantage of looking up and seeing mountains. Well, when something terribly important and terribly challenging comes our way, the best thing to do is start at the beginning and recognize that you're a beginner and start with beginning books. Thus, I called my book on prayer, Prayer for Beginners. I wanted to call it Prayer for Dummies, but that title was taken, so it would have been legal action. I wish somebody would write a book that actually lived up to the title Computers for Dummies. I am a computer dummy. I am incredibly stupid about computers. What everybody else understands, I don't understand. And I've never found a book that's simple enough and easy enough and insulting enough that I can take the first step. Well, praying is, in one way, like using computers, it's something that's not automatic and easy. And there are a lot of challenges along the way. And I'll give you the only thing I can, which is the most basic beginning lessons. I like KISS, not necessarily a rock group, but the idea, keep it simple, stupid. So that's what I'm going to try to do now. There are basically 7 questions you can ask about anything. And therefore 7 questions you can ask about prayer. What is it? Whether it is, why it is, who it is, when it is, where it is, and how it is. What, whether, why, who, when, where, and how. Okay? Let's start with whether you pray or not. The single most important rule of prayer, single thing that I want you to remember, if you remember absolutely nothing else, is a simple one-syllable word. It's the word that was made famous by a marriage counselor that I never met, but I heard about. Some people didn't like him. He was very tough and simple and uncompromising, but he healed a number of marriages that couldn't be healed otherwise. Couples would come to him, and he would say, "What's your problem?" And they would usually say, "Our problem is that we don't love each other anymore." And he said, "Well, I got a solution for you. It's a single syllable. Do. We mean do love each other." But we don't. Well, do it. Unless you decide to do it, you won't do it. It's an act of will. It's not a feeling. It's not a gimmick. It's not a technique. Just do it. Oh. Oh. You mean you're not going to solve our problem for us? We have to solve it? Exactly. Oh. So do it. All right. That's my single syllable answer to what's the most important thing about prayer. Do it. How you pray, when you pray, what you pray, that's important, but not nearly as important as doing it. Oh. Maybe it's because I'm a philosophy professor. I think a lot. But I suspect everybody's a little bit like me in that we substitute thinking for doing. Thinking so much easier. For instance, what's the meaning of life? The meaning of life, obviously, is to love God and your neighbor with your whole heart and to become a saint. All right. Let's think about that. No, let's do it. Oh, but it's so much easier to think about. Thinking is sometimes what we're doing. Oh. Okay. Well, why do we have to pray? In order not to die. We're all going to die in our body, but hopefully we're not going to die in our soul, which can. Just as your body dies when it doesn't get food, it withers. So your soul dies if it doesn't get food. What is the food of the soul? Contact with God. In other words, prayer. If you don't pray, you die. Nobody can go to heaven without prayer. Going to heaven means you love God. And if you love God, you'll pray. And if you don't pray, you don't love God. So if you don't pray, you don't go to heaven. It's as simple as that. It's not a works righteousness thing. It's not that God says, okay, unless they pray at least 5 minutes a day, I'm going to send them to hell. That's ridiculous. It's not that. If you do these things enough of it, you'll go to heaven. That's ridiculous. There's no cutoff point. If you help 9 little old ladies across the street, you go to hell, but if you help 10, you go to heaven. That's ridiculous. That's as ridiculous as saying that God gives you a theology test to get to heaven. And if you're a heretic, that is, if you get 59, you don't make it, and if you get 60, you make it. No. If you have God in your soul, you go to heaven, and if not, not. Well, how do you get God in your soul? You love Him. And if you love Him, you'll pray. So prayer is literally a matter of life and death. Prayer is to the soul what food is to the body. It's survival. And if you do everything else, if you gain the whole world and lose your own soul, you're a fool. My candidate for the single most practical sentence ever uttered by any human being in the entire history of the world is Jesus' spiritual economics. What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? All right? That's why you have to do it. That's how important it is. Well, what is it? Well, that's easy too. Prayer is simply practicing God's presence. Conversation, verbal or nonverbal, with God. We all know that. No mystery there. Everything else is accidental. Forms of prayer, methods of prayer, contents of prayer, intentions of prayer, that's all important. But what it is simply, I am here, you are there. The curé of ours once discovered a man in the front pew of the church. He was there every day, and he was praying, and he looked different than most people did when they prayed. He wasn't distracted. He was alert, and he was calm, and he was happy, and he was just there. And he wasn't moving his lips. He wasn't doing anything. He just stayed there for hours. And the curé, who was a very holy man, said, "This man is holier than I am. He knows prayer better than I do." He was just a peasant. So once he went up to him and said, "What do you do when you pray?" And the peasant said, "Well, I just look at him and he just looks at me." Well, that's perfect. That's perfect. If you really love somebody, just being in their presence and just looking at them is enough. Doing things, saying things, singing things, that's fine, that'll come, but that's not the essence of it. The essence is simply presence. That's why I think one of my favorite spiritual classics is one of the simplest ones ever written by Brother Waters, The Practice of the Presence of God. Another word for the practice of the presence of God is sanity. Sanity. You mean sanctity? Well, the two are identical. What? Here. What is sanity? Sanity is living in the real world. Right? In the real world, where is God? Everywhere. in the real world, is God present? Yes. So if you don't practice that, you don't live in reality. You live in insanity. Most of us are insane, most of the time. This is one of the meanings of original sin. For instance, every time you make a moral choice, God is offering you an opportunity to exercise your free will. He comes at you with two hands, not one hand. He makes you an offer you can refuse. That's how he's different from the God product. He makes you an offer you can't refuse. So he gives you free will. So in his right hand, he has the secret of all joy. Love me, love my will, do my will. That's the secret of joy. In his left hand, he has the secret of misery. Ignore me, say no to me, and you'll be miserable. As long as you do it. And if you do it eternally, you'll have misery eternally. So here's his right hand, the secret of joy. Here's his left hand, the secret of misery. So right hand, my will be done. Left hand, your will be done. So we go to him and we say, okay, God, I have a choice now. Am I going to do your will or my will? Let's see. Every single time I've done your will, I found joy, deep down in the end. Every time I've done my will instead, I found misery, deep down in the end. So what'll it be this time? Gee, that's a tough one, God. That's a really severe temptation. Let me try the left hand. Maybe it'll work this time. We're insane. Sin is insane. So God is our psychiatrist and he wants to heal us. He has a great sense of humor. And he laughs at his very severely retarded children. And he loves us anyway. By the way, if you don't have a sense of humor, that's a very serious impediment to becoming insane. That means you're taking yourself too seriously. God has a terrific sense of humor. In fact, I think God has such a terrific sense of humor that when he appeared on earth, that was the one thing he hid from people. When he went off into a mountain to pray, what was there that he wanted to keep private? Well, we couldn't have stood it. It would be unendurable to see him laughing. But in heaven, we'll be able to see him laughing. We'll laugh with him. And some of the saints say that we'll even laugh at our sins in heaven. Shouldn't do that here. It's taken very seriously. But once it's all over, we'll laugh at how stupid we were. All right, that's whether you pray and what prayer is. Why do you pray? What's your motive? Well, I gave you one already, to be sane. And a second one, to find joy. Being with God is the secret of joy. And to clear away the clouds. The first thing that a prayer gives you, I think, is a vision of the real world. What beyond appearances is the truth. Prayer undeceives you. We love to deceive ourselves. Any good psychologist will say that one thing every human being is incredibly clever at is self-deception and hiding for yourself. And the more you know yourself, the more you know how messy and spiderwebby the human heart is in doing that. But when you pray, you clear those clouds away. And you stand in the light. And you can't fool yourself anymore. Maybe we don't want to do that. It's kind of embarrassing, but it's necessary. It makes you sane. Next question, who? Well, that's two questions. Who's praying and who you're praying to. And there's an incredibly simple answer to both questions. You have to do the praying. Other people can pray for you, but they can't pray instead of you. Prayer is like death. You do it alone. It's individual. And the God that you pray to, there's only one of them. Not many. When he gave commandments, the very first commandment was, you should worship me only. Now, most of us don't have stone idols and wooden idols, and most of us don't pray to Zeus or Apollo or Canaanite deities anymore, but we're still idolaters. All sin is idolatry. All sin says there's something that's more important than God to me. So we have to keep coming back to that. There's only one God. We have to be at least as clear as the Muslims that there is no God but God. That's the heart of Islam. La ilaha illallah. There is no God but the God. So prayer simplifies you. It puts all the responsibility on your shoulders, and it puts all the responsibility on God's shoulders. Augustine, in his soliloquies, imagines a dialogue between God and his soul. And God says to him, Augustine, what do you want to know? And Augustine says, only two things. God says, only two things? Yeah. Well, what two things you want to know? And Augustine says, I want to know who you are, and I want to know who I am. Is that all? Says God, yeah, that's all. It's very wise. Because everything in the world, everything in the universe, from the Big Bang to the little scrap of paper that you picked up from the floor this morning, everything is part of Jacob's ladder. It's part of the enormous ladder that goes from you at the bottom to God at the top. The whole world is relative. There's only two absolutes, you and God. There's only two people that you could never, ever, for a single second, can escape. In time or in eternity. Yourself and God. So, everything is Jacob's ladder. And the angels and the saints and the church and everybody else and the community, which is crucial, are all going up and down Jacob's ladder, like 18-wheelers on a superhighway. And that's all the stuff in your life. And that's the context of prayer. Because prayer immediately gets you to the top of the ladder. It doesn't make you a saint, doesn't make you perfect, doesn't make you wise, but the top of the ladder, God, and the bottom of the ladder, you, come together in prayer. It's amazing. God didn't have to do that. And actually, what made it possible was a historical event. I mean, here's God, infinitely perfect, incomprehensible, unattainable. And here's us, stupid, fallen, silly, selfish sinners. How in the world did those two things get together? Only by Jesus Christ. There's a universe of veils between us and God. When Jesus died, the veil of the temple was broken. And on the other side of that veil was the Holy of Holies, where God dwelt. And on this side of the veil is us. And when that veil was broken, when that curtain was shattered, we got access to the throne room. The Jews could never enter even into the holy place unless they were priests. And the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was, only once did the high priest dare to enter that, once a year on the Day of Atonement. Now everybody can enter the Holy of Holies, and that's called prayer. Incredible privilege. God's own throne room. All right, next question. I said what, whether, why, and who. Next question is when. When do you pray? Well, all the time. We know enough about psychology to know that the unconscious or the subconscious is much bigger than the conscious. It's impossible to consciously pray all the time. I mean, imagine a farmer sowing seed and saying, okay, God, this seed is for you, and this seed is for you, and this seed is for you. He wouldn't ever finish. Consciously, to pray is something special and different. It's sacred rather than secular. And most of our lives are secular. So we can't literally consciously pray all the time. But you can subconsciously pray all the time. When you take a morning offering, as I hope you all do, that's basically saying to God, God, I can't get these two parts of my life together. This conscious intention and the rest of my life. But at least, here, take this conscious intention. I give you, right now, all the prayers and works and joys and sufferings of my day. Now, watch out what you say to God. He's got good ears. He's not deaf. He takes it seriously. He'll do that. Okay. You'll forget me, God says, but I won't forget you. I promise. And he won't. And it makes an enormous difference. Most people think, most of the time I think, that praying is just a good psychological technique and God honors it and so on. But he takes you literally. He takes you seriously. If you give him everything, he'll take everything. It's scary. I once heard a priest talk about prayer. He was just a very ordinary priest, but obviously a very good and holy man. And I just got the sense that he knew a lot more about prayer than I did. So I went up to him afterwards and I said, Father, there's something you're not saying. I mean, what you said I heard before, and it's very good and it's very helpful, but I just sense that You're better at this than I am. What's the secret? There's no secret. I said, well, what do you do when you pray? He said, well, I just pray the Lord's Prayer. That's the prayer God himself gave us. I said, yeah, I do too, but how do you do it? He said, there's no method. I said, no. I pushed him. I said, come on, what do you do? He said, well, I just say everything, and I mean it to you. I said, yeah, I try to. He said, well, what do you do when you come to the part where it says, thy will be done? And I said, well, I try to mean it with my whole heart, and then if I'm honest enough, I say, God, I want to mean this with my whole heart, but I don't, so make my heart whole, and clear the junk out of my will, and whatnot. I say, that's good. And then what do you do? He said, well, you wanted the next petition. He said, I think I got you. What do you mean? You forgot something. What'd you forget? He said, after I say, thy will be done, I duck. I forgot to duck. That man took God seriously. God will take you seriously. I mean, God will laugh at you and also take you seriously. Like your toddlers. Remember when your kids were toddlers? They were learning to walk and they fell flat on their face and you laughed at them, but you took them very seriously. And when they cried, you kissed their boo-boos and you took them seriously. At the same time, you were laughing at them. I think that's what we are to God. He takes you very seriously. All right, so pray all the time. And of course, there's got to be a special time. And whenever you have the time and the space, use it. And if you don't have any time and space, make it. And early in the morning and late at night is good because that surrounds sleep, which is an image of death, which confronts eternity. But most of us are too tired once we first get up and when we go to sleep, so that's not a good time for long prayer. That's a good time for short prayer. So find some other time, okay? But it's got to be regular. You've got to make a habit of it. Because the will and the passion to create a new habit is very hard. But once the habit's there, it's easy to follow. So if you have to figure out a different time every single day when you're going to spend serious time to pray, you probably won't do it. So make a time, whatever works. Different strokes for different folks. If you got one absolute, everything else can be relative. Where is like when? Is there a place where you're not bothered? As a last resort, go into the bathroom and lock the door. People won't follow you. I do a lot of good work in the bathroom. People think I have constipation. Of course, the best place to pray is before the Blessed Sacrament. That's Jesus himself. And unless the church is a deliberate liar, Jesus Christ is just as fully and completely and really and personally present there as he was on the dusty streets of Jerusalem. So that, if you don't do Eucharistic adoration, please do it. It transforms lives, it transforms parishes. It's real. The single Catholic doctrine that converted me the most, that changed my mind the most, was the Eucharist. Because reading the Church Fathers as a Protestant, trying to convince myself that I was in the church that Jesus established, namely a church that was essentially a Protestant church that went bad as Catholic in the Middle Ages, I discovered that every single Christian in the world believed that Jesus Christ is really present in the Eucharist until the Reformation. There were a few heretics that just got kicked out easily before that. So I said to myself, wait a minute. If what we as Protestants believe, namely this is just a sacred symbol, and that that's not Jesus Christ, if that's true, then all these Catholics are really committing the most egregious idolatry conceivable. They're bowing down to bread and worshiping wine, thinking it's Almighty God. How would God allow that horrible heresy to happen for 1,500 years? On the other hand, that's really Jesus. And he's knocking on my door and saying, I'm here. And I say, no, you're not. It's only a picture. What an opportunity I'm missing. Wow. So take him seriously. He's there. That's the very best place to pray. Even a few minutes a day going in to a church if you pass one. And at least in Virginia, I think the churches stay open. You don't have to lock the doors because they're, in New York City, the churches are often locked. Because there's a lot of problems, but this is Virginia, right? Hope the churches stay open. Jesus anyway is always open. All right, last question, how? And the most important thing to say here, and all the saints say this, is it doesn't matter. Methods don't matter. Different strokes for different folks. Some people use methods very usefully. For other people, they're distractions, and there's no one method that works for everybody. Methods are technologies. And there's no technology for prayer, because prayer is love, and there's no technology for love. One of the stupidest titles of a popular book I ever heard of was Eric Fromm's book, The Art of Loving. And art is kind of a practical science, kind of a technology. There's no technology for love. You just do it. You can't push a button and turn love on. You can push a button and turn electricity on, because you're greater than electricity. But you're not greater than love, because love is God. God is love. So you can't control God with technology, including prayer technology. So just do it. It comes from the heart, not from buttons. So the how question is not terribly important. Nevertheless, it is helpful to find a kind of a roadmap. For instance, there's 3 levels of prayer. Almost all the saints teach this. It starts with verbal prayer. You don't talk to God with your mouth. You never get beyond that. And most of us want, I think, to climb to meditative or contemplative prayer too soon. And if we read the great masters, we say, I better practice more contemplative prayer and less verbal prayer. Well, maybe not. Maybe we're underestimating words, the power of words. It's true that lovers are most deeply one with each other when they're just gazing into each other's eyes in silence. But you don't start there. You start with words. And you never get to a point where you never use words. When his disciples asked Jesus, teach us to pray, he gave words. We're not Hindus and Buddhists. The highest thing is not mystical experience that goes beyond words. The highest thing is being a saint. And that's quite compatible with words. So verbal prayer is not just for beginners. It goes all the way up. But there's also meditative prayer. And that means using your mind. Your mind is a terribly important instrument. It's not that your heart and love is over here and your mind and thought is over here and they're just different. They're integrated. All choices, all free choices of the will begin with thought. In fact, St. Paul tells us in his epistles, take every single thought captive to Christ. Thoughts are like wild horses. Capture them, tame them, ride them. Buddha, who was a great psychologist, he was not a very great theologian, but he was a great psychologist. The very first line of the Dhammapada, the most popular book in Buddhism, is, all that we are is made of our thoughts. It begins where our thoughts begin, it moves where our thoughts move, it ends where our thoughts end. St. Benedict, in telling his monks how to pray the Psalms, comes to Psalm 137, I think it is, the one that begins, by the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. How could we sing the songs of Zion in a foreign land? O Jerusalem, if I forget you, let my tongue cleave to my mouth. Beautiful, sensitive. The last couple of verses of that are a problem. O Babylon destroyer, blessed be he who seizes your little babies and smashes their brains out against the curbstone.
Yes.
What? How are the Christians supposed to pray that? Well, St. Benedict says, it's an allegory. You can't interpret that literally. Yeah, you hate little babies and want to kill them. That's ridiculous. Those are little baby thoughts. And Babylon is the devil's kingdom. And all sins begin in thought. So the first rule of how to be a saint and how to conquer sin is start with thought. As soon as you have a tempting thought, have no mercy on it. Have much more mercy on sinners, but less mercy on sins. and have great mercy on people, but have no mercy at all on thoughts. Do to thoughts what Jesus did in that first scene in Mel Gibson's marvelous movie, The Passion of the Christ. Remember, he's there in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's being tempted, and he's sweating bloody tears, and the snake crawls up. And instantly, as soon as he sees that snake, stop. No pity, no hesitation. First thought, kill him. That's good. Thought's terribly important. And meditative prayer uses thought by directing it to God through things like reading Scripture. Reading the Bible without praying is good, but reading the Bible and praying at the same time is better. Praying outside the Bible is good, but praying as you're reading the Bible is often better, especially the Gospels. Here, too, it's different strokes for different folks. Many people find Ignatian meditation from spiritual exercises very useful. That imaginative, putting yourself in the scene and understanding how Peter's acting and how Judas is acting and how Jesus is acting, and you're there and identifying with all the characters. That can be helpful. It's not for me. I have ADD and I get distracted very simply. Very easily, but many people find that helpful. Certainly, reading the Psalms, especially the Messianic Psalms and your favorite Psalms, over and over again. It's inexhaustible. God gave us a prayer book. So let's use it. Jesus used it, the apostles used it, all the saints used it. That's meditative prayer. Finally, contemplative prayer is what the Correlative peasant practiced. You're just here, you're just practicing his presence. You're just content with his presence. Lovers are content with presence. That's it. When somebody you love is dying, you want to do something for them. You want to heal them, but you can't. You want to enable them to enjoy life again, but you can't. What's the single most important thing you can do with them, for them? Just be there. Just presence. Imagine you're stuck in a blizzard. You don't have blizzards here, we do in the Northeast. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's terribly cold, and your car battery just conked out. And you call AAA, and they can't come for 2 hours. So you've got to stay in that cold car in the middle of the blizzard. And you're grateful to AAA when they come and finally give you a tow. But suppose a friend just happens to see you and comes out of his house and says, "What's the matter?" And you say, "Well, I got to wait for AAA." He stays in the car with you for 2 hours. Who are you most grateful to? The tow truck or your friend? Your friend. Well, your friend is Jesus. He stays with you wherever you are. Presence. That's the main thing. You don't even have to talk much. Just be there. Themes of prayer. What we pray about. The church also, in her wisdom, gives us a very basic answer to that. There's 4 basic themes of prayer. And the fundamental theme is praise and adoration. I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. Just keep saying it and saying it until you die. And thanksgiving. Count your blessings. Literally. How many of you have ever thanked God for squirrels? I mean, they can be a pest, but they're kind of cute and furry and make life a little interesting, and you watch them play. And where did squirrels come from? God invented them. How many of you thank God for fingernails? Well, you didn't have any. You couldn't scratch. There's thousands of things in your life that are blessings that you can pray for, especially, obviously, the big things. Thank you for your love, for your grace. Thank you for the gift of faith. Thank you for making me a Catholic. You didn't have to. You did. All right. And then confession and repentance. I'm a fool. I'm an idiot. I'm a sinner. You love me anyway. Isn't it wonderful? And then finally, petition. If you start with petition, you don't get the big picture. It's not in the right context. But if you're asking the God that you already adore and thank and repent towards, then you're in the real world. And then you're asking for the right things and in the right spirit. And when you petition, I think since almost all of us have, let's say between 10 and 100 people that are really good friends, I think you should spend about at least 10 times more interceding for other people's needs than for your own. And there's certainly a lot of people in the world that need you. And your prayers, as I said before, God takes your prayers very seriously, and they make a difference. You don't see sometimes how they make a difference. God doesn't zap you with sight. He tests your faith. But they make a difference. In fact, I'm convinced that if God let us see all the differences the least little prayers of ours make, if God let us see the fact that when we prayed an extra Hail Mary for old Uncle Scrooge, and if he let us see the difference that made in his life and the life of the people he touched and the life of the people they touched, wow, we would be so overcome with responsibility, we would never be able to get up from our knees for the rest of our lives. The Eastern Orthodox have a saying, a lot of their saints say some version of this. If you pray one more prayer, or exercise one more act of charity this afternoon, the difference that will make is that 300 years from now, some poor guy on the other side of the world that you never met or dreamed of will have enough grace to overcome his temptation and overcome despair, and if not, not. Because we're all in a body. Even on the secular level, the human race is a single race, a single family, a single body. And on the spiritual level, in the mystical body, each of us is an organ in that body. And whenever anything happens to the body, everything reacts. You stick a little pin in your hand, and your attention is diverted from your feet and for everything else because of that pin. Everything touches everything. That's true in the physical world. There's gravity, universal gravity. When you drop a book on Earth, stones on the moon tremble just a little bit. You can measure how much. It's literally measurable, depending on the mass and the distance. So if everything in the universe is dependent on each other by physical gravity, why shouldn't everything in the spiritual universe be dependent on each other by a spiritual gravity? So there's no such thing as a victimless crime. Every crime hurts everybody. And every act of charity helps everybody. You don't see that, but you can believe it. And if you do, then you'll take your prayers very seriously. The questions about what I said. Or about anything else, anything or anything beyond that.
Really not a question, but it was something that was very impacting prayer-wise for me. My wife is going through. She has severe dementia, and it's critical, and probably won't make it to Easter. And in that process, I was very angry with God, and that was my prayer. I really have a lot of conversational prayer. He probably gets tired of hearing, but maybe not. But anger was all I had through this process. And I have a very close friend of mine who is my at-distance spiritual director in California, Frank Wagner, who some of you all might know. And I shared this with him because it made me very upset that that's all I could do, is be angry in my prayer. And what he told me was that I shouldn't stop being angry with God because it was the only prayer that I had right now. And if I stopped being angry, my prayer life would be zero. And that everyone else would pray in for the situation. So that really led me into sort of a reconciliation process through prayer of not being so angry and being able to listen a little better to what was trying to come back to me. So it's just a comment, and I felt like I needed to share that.
That's beautiful and profound. Thank you for it. And you're right, except you forgot two things. You didn't just have anger, you had faith. That's why you shared your anger with God. And secondly, it wasn't just you. It was everybody else who was praying for you. Right now, as you were talking, everybody's praying for you, subconsciously. So you're not alone. Obviously, this brings up the subject, how do we deal with sufferings that we don't understand in our prayers? And the answer has to be awfully simple. God, I don't understand this and I hate this, but I've got to trust you. I've got nothing else. When the ship is sinking, that's the last thing to do is to throw away the life preserver, your life preserver, and hang on to you.
What's your take on Thomas Keating and centering prayer?
I don't know it well enough. I am told by those who are more expert than I that the simplifying of our consciousness is a very good thing, and that the techniques that Keating uses are more Eastern than Western and more Hindu than Christian. I don't know whether that's accurate or not. So I can't with confidence say, yes, follow him, he's reliable, or watch out, maybe a little dangerous. I just don't know.
Can you repeat the question again so folks can...
Yeah, centering prayer, as taught by Thomas Keating. Is it a kind of dangerously Hindu, atheist sort of thing, sneaking into Christian prayer? Or is it a good psychological technique for doing Christian prayer? I just don't know. You have to use your discernment there.
Any advice on...
The same, by the way, is true of Anthony DeMello, who's another writer on prayer who often uses psychological techniques that are more familiar in the East than in the West. That doesn't mean they're wrong. The touchstone is Jesus Christ. If it brings you closer to Christ, good. If it doesn't, bad.
Focused prayer versus praying for God's will. Where you look at Baptist and Protestant, got focused right on it. Say exactly what it is for that person, exactly right down to every doctor and everybody that's going to work on that person. Versus God's will for the healing of the person.
Well, it's got to be both.
It's both.
It's got to be both. Because if you don't give a God a blank check, your will be done, no matter what. then you're holding something back. And if you don't pray about concrete things, you're vague and wispy, and we human beings react to the concrete much more than the abstract. It's very hard for us to hold abstractions, which is why all the great teachers like Jesus use parables. They're concrete stories that illustrate universal truths. So you need both. Most either-or questions are answered by both of them.
Good. Any advice on how to, you mentioned killing thoughts, like I have some thoughts that won't die. How do we do that?
No, I wasn't saying that you, I'm glad you put it that way because I think I misspoke. I didn't mean kill thoughts. I mean, in your thought life, kill temptations to sin. If you have distracting thoughts, and everybody does, we all have spiritual ADD. If you have distracting thoughts, don't focus on the distractions, or on methods, or on techniques, and don't worry about it. If you have gnats flying around your head, distracting thoughts. You want to be Mary, but you're Martha. And you're worried about where the silverware is. And Jesus is here. What do? Well, you can try to swat the gnats away, but that's not going to work. They're just going to come back. The more attention you pay to them, the more they like it. They're like teenage kids who make a lot of noise just to get your attention. Now, suppose you're doing something terribly important. Suppose you're driving a school bus with a lot of kids in it, down a busy highway at a high speed, and suddenly a cloud of gnats appears around your head. What do? You pay attention to the gnats? Do you swat them? No. You crack up the butt. Ignore them. Will they go away? Maybe so, maybe not. Eventually they will. It doesn't matter. Ignore them. If those gnats are minor temptations from some minor demon, demons are a little bit like teenagers. They hate to be ignored. You really want to bother them, ignore them. They want your attention. And God allows this to keep you humble. God could zap you right now into instant mystical experience. He doesn't do it. How come? How come God doesn't give you the grace to overcome all your sins at once? He wants to keep you humble. If he did, you'd be proud. That would be worse. So, thank him for the gnats. Thank him for everything that he allows. Everything that he does, which is good. And even what he allows, which is bothersome. And maybe even, well, don't thank him for your sins, but thank him for his plan to heal you gradually. In heaven, we'll all be perfect. And it's grace that gets you there. But grace is like life. It gradually grows. And we want to all go faster than grace. We want instant sanctity. And God doesn't. You'll learn a lot along the way. So be patient. Hard to do. One of my favorite prayers is, God, give me patience right now. Yeah.
There's a strong theme of forgiveness in Christianity, and it makes me think that perhaps forgiveness of our persecutors. It makes me think perhaps the admonitions where you should just forgive your persecutors come from people that perhaps have never been actually persecuted. And so, in the context of prayer, how do you address the struggle to forgive? I mean, an actual affront, like a really profound affront.
I think you have to sharply separate your feelings from your will. Your feelings lag behind. And even if you want to forgive your persecutors, you can't stand them. That's okay. Forgiveness begins in the will. And as long as you want to forgive them, no matter how you feel about them, you have forgiven them. I love the Chinese fable about faith, fact, and feeling. There are three men walking along a wall. Fact comes first. Faith comes second. He keeps his eyes on fact, objective truth. And then feeling comes third. And as long as they go in that order, like a train, with an engine and a car and a caboose, the train goes along the tracks and it stays on the wall. But suppose that the second guy, Faith, takes his eyes off of fact and turns around and looks at feeling. How's feeling doing? He falls off the wall, and so does feeling. But fact keeps going on. So, the essence of faith is not a feeling. The essence of faith is truth. What you believe is what God has revealed. God said it, I believe it, that settles it. And the feelings will come along gradually, but only slowly. And they're the last part of our spiritual life to be healed. So don't expect them to be perfect. In fact, if you didn't have some residual feelings of anger about persecution, it'd be something psychologically wrong with you, or at least you'd be, or else you'd be a perfected saint. You're probably not.
Thank God.
Yeah.
I have a question with regards to youth and young adult ministry. I know as a professor you have a lot of experience with this. In terms of the introduction of these different ways of praying and seeking to entice these young adults and youth to continue this prayer life from a young age, what recommendations do you have for us?
The one thing that springs to my mind immediately is they're all hungry, but they don't admit it. Especially teenagers are very, very aware of what other people think of them. Face, personal relationships. What so-and-so would think of me. And they don't want to be embarrassed. So they don't want to be preached at. And let's sit down and have a good talk. That's the worst thing you could possibly say. So you've got to wait until the door opens, and then put your foot in it. And how do you get that door open a little bit? That's tricky. I don't know. Get them in a youth organization, which is devoted mainly to fun, but also has a spiritual component in it, and they expect that. And then, okay, now we're going to talk about prayer. Well, that's okay. It's not, let's sit down and talk about it. And then they're expecting it. But the context is the main thing. God designed the human heart, and we all need Him, and we all need love, and we all need prayer. So the fields, however rocky the fields are, plants can grow in those fields. But you just got to get the opportunity. And go to some psychologist for tricks about how to open them up. But once you open them up, you'll find they're all potential saints. Dropouts and drug addicts and angry people, they're potential saints. Look what God made out of Ignatius Loyola and Augustine, taking away the Western world, and St. Paul, an angry persecutor of the church. Never give up on them. Yeah.
I'm just going back to the idea when you were talking about the insane versus insane. But one thing I see, like with youth, or even adults, is especially with Catholicism, is prayer to the saints, prayer before images, and how to deal with that struggle. When they're young, it's kind of easy to teach them, or show them, or talk to them about it. As they get older and they have friends in school, or other people say, Catholics are all crazy, you're idolaters. You know, if you're doing that, it starts to, in our world, seem like, this is kind of crazy. How would you deal with that struggle of praying in front of images, or praying to the saints, but still saying, God is everywhere?
Well, that's a pretty easy one, because if they're exposed to anti-Catholic critics, the issue is important to them. They're not indifferent. Even if they're suckered in to anti-Catholic propaganda, they care about it. And that's better than not caring about it. And the church has a wealth of answers to all those traditional anti-Catholic objections. And if they really want to know, tell them. We don't pray to saints, we love them. Like you love your father or your uncle. And they're our heroes. And we love to admire heroes. And if they're alive in heaven and still heroes, you can talk to them. And we ask each other to pray for us, so why not ask our dead heroes to pray for us? They're not dead, they're alive, they're here. Every single Catholic doctrine is beautiful. And every single piece of anti-Catholic propaganda misses that beauty. And if they're suckered in by the anti-Catholic propaganda, good, that's an opportunity to show them how beautiful the true Catholic doctrine is. That's so across the board. Yeah.
I hesitate to ask this, and if it's off topic, by means, but you mentioned a couple of times about absolutes and relatives. Can you explain that a little bit, or help me understand?
Everything in this universe is relative, except individual human beings. They're absolutely irreplaceable, and they have intrinsic and absolute value. You can't calculate them. And God. Everything else is relative. How much money you have, how much food you eat, how many years you live, matter, it's all relative. It's good. God created it. But there's only one absolute God, and He made only one thing in His own image, namely human beings.
How does that fit in with relativism, or does it?
Relativism denies that there are any absolutes. The relativist ultimately says that there is no God, or at least God is not what He is in Christianity, the one absolute. God is just a nice feeling or whatever. And a relativist, if he's a consistent relativist, will say people are not absolute either. People are just cogs in the machine, and we like them, and we should be nice to them, but they're not. They're just clever apes. And we say no. Every human being It's more like God than like an ape. We're not made in the image of King Kong. We're made in the image of King God.
I was thinking about this gentleman here and something that I've felt is true and has been spoken to me before, that in those sorts of crises, sometimes our prayer is not the spoken prayer, but it is the getting up every day and the living it out and being a faithful husband and the caring for his wife. That is prayer. And it's not always the words. And in those times, you're kind of like the person who is the paralytic on the mat. You may be the paralytic and you're just surviving. And the people around you who are praying for you and your wife, they are like the people who are carrying the mat and carrying you to Christ. And so I think oftentimes in the middle of a crisis, we may feel, our feelings come into play where we don't feel we're faithful or prayerful or close to God. But the continuing on is our faith. I don't know if you agree with that.
I totally agree with that. Sometimes the only prayer you can make is the title of the Beatles movie, Help. Which is still a prayer. It's very honest. And God respects that. The two shocks I had when I first started to read the saints about prayer is, one, how much they discounted methods, and two, how much they discounted feelings. Feelings make up most of our interior lives, but you're not directly in control of your feelings. When Jesus commands love, he's not commanding a feeling. You can't command feelings. I command you to feel compassionate love and affection for me. How ridiculous. So, if you reduce something like a thought or a will to a feeling, you're in trouble. So even though you're feeling totally abandoned, Jesus on the cross felt totally abandoned for his Father. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? That's hell. He didn't feel present to it, but he was. So that was pure faith that he had on the cross. Nothing else. No feeling at all. That was the most powerful prayer ever made. That saved the human race. And we're privileged to participate in that a little bit. This is one of the reasons God doesn't give us more feelings. He could. He could overwhelm us with feelings. He could give us infinite heavenly joy. Why doesn't he do it? We'd get a spiritual sweet tooth. We'd stop with the feeling. So he wants to test us. He makes us tough. He takes away our crutch. Feelings are crutches, and we need crutches. We're cripples. Obviously we need feelings. We can't get along without them. But we have to learn to walk on our own 2 feet. That's tough. God's tough. He's tough and tender. It's a very unusual combination. Some people are either tough or tender. He's both. He's easy to please, and he's hard to satisfy. He's a good parent.
How do you respond to a young person who is starting to pray for the first time and is legitimately trying but feels as if they've never really experienced God from their family or from anybody else around them and is having a hard time connecting with the idea of God as someone who actually cares about them?
Well, that depends on whether that person goes to church, reads the Bible, has CCD, goes to Sunday school, whether they know anything about God other than God exists and you should pray to him. Because if they've got even a rudimentary theological education, it's much easier. They know, even though they don't feel, that God is all-knowing and all-loving and all-powerful. If not, start with that. If he deserves the name God, what does that mean? Number one, he created the universe. So he has all power. He has as much power over everything in the universe as an author has in everything in his book. All right. If he's not all powerful, he's not God. Number two, he's all good. If he's evil, if he's a devil, you want to run away from him, not towards him. Well, what's the essence of goodness? He loves you. Okay. Number three, he's all wise. He knows everything, just as an author knows everything in his book. So if he's all wise, and he's all good, and he's all powerful, you can trust him. You can pray to him and know that he understands you, and he loves you, and he's going to do the right thing by you. That's at least elementary theology. And it's also helpful, I think, especially with older children who want very much to be adult and to grow up, to make them realize that it's your choice. You can choose to believe in this God and to pray to this God or not. That's a kind of empowerment. So don't say, it's your duty to pray, and if you don't pray, you're a bad person. That does more harm than good. Appeal to their freedom.
I think we're going to take a short break. Thank you so much for the morning session.